One story which emerged that afternoon does seem to stretch credibility to its limit. As though Prince Edward having AIDS and the Queen dying of a heart attack because she's just constantly eating for comfort weren't large enough lies as it is. Bashir claimed that William had received from his father a watch. In fact, he even named the manufacturer. It was a Swatch, very popular in the mid-1990s. Bashir claimed that it contained a recording device, and he was therefore recording his mother. The very idea of the then 13-year-old Prince William doing any such thing, it's beyond unsettling. So now he's implicating Prince William? That watch he wears, the one he wanted? Recording device. Even your own 13-year-old son's after you. I mean, at that point, I would have flipped the table and told the beast to get out. Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Cheer Denise. We are going to keep going in Dianarama today, and we are on Chapter 7, A List of Lies. Now, if you're here, I know you're invested, so we're going to dive right back in. 2 weeks had slid by after Martin Bashir presented his first set of forgeries on August 31st, 1995. But when Spencer saw the second date on September 14th, the reaction was immediate. Spencer remembers calling Diana soon after Bashir left. When I told Diana about Jeffson and Aylard, she was absolutely intrigued and wanted to learn more as quickly as possible. The bait scattered onto the water at Althorp had been snapped up right away by Diana in Kensington Palace. Diana's friend Richard Kay told me Diana was extremely keen. I know this because she spoke to me and said that she'd had a conversation with her brother, Charles, Carlos as she called him. She said, "Carlos has spoken to a man at the BBC, and he's told him all about what I'm going through, people spying on me." At last she said that someone in her family knew what it was like to be her, so Diana was hooked at that stage. The brother and sister had used their pet names since childhood. Charles was Carlos, Diana was Dutch. A note which Diana sent to Spencer makes it plain just how excited she was. "Darling Carlos, I so appreciated the contents of our telephone call this morning. It all makes complete sense as to what's going on round me at this present time. They underestimate the Spencer strength. Lots of love, from Dutch." This was a Thursday. Spencer agreed to get Bashir back to Althorp 3 days later to meet Diana once brother and sister had had a catch-up. He said, "I arranged for her to join me for lunch at Althorp at 12:30 p.m. on Sunday, September 17th, and organized for Bashir to join us at 2 p.m. However, for some reason this fell through, and I then arranged for me to introduce Diana to Bashir in London on Tuesday, September 19th. What Diana heard from her brother must have shaken her, as Patrick Jeffson told me. I was her private secretary, her most senior trusted advisor. We'd been working together for nearly 8 years. Bashir told her that I was in cahoots with her enemy, her husband's private secretary, and that I was gaining from this financially, and at the same time that I was spying on her for the British security services. The source was critical too. Here was Diana's brother, a journalist himself, a journalist with a deep suspicion of most reporters. Yet what he had been told had come from the BBC, the most trusted, the most august, the most boring in a good way news outfit in the world. The BBC man had documents too. The news Carlos had to share must be true. But why paint Patrick Jeffson in particular as a traitor? In Jeffson's view, Bashir may have seen me as the principal obstacle to his ambition of getting the interview that interviewers all over the world were competing to get. Jeffson had always been Diana's media gatekeeper. The world's most prominent TV figures all wanted her. Barbara Walters, Oprah Winfrey, David Frost. She was always very courteous, but always said no. Or more to the point, I used to say no on her behalf. Wiping Jeffson off the board would be essential to get Diana in front of a camera. But when it came to the day of the meeting, the following Tuesday, Jeffson would later discover that there was much more to Bashir's game plan. It wasn't just about me. It was a whole cast of characters that he was suddenly laying out for her, like some kind of thriller. The meeting began at 4 p.m. on September 19th in the Knightsbridge apartment of one of Spencer's old friends, writer Samantha Weinberg. Spencer said, "I had set for Bashir to come just a bit later. I vaguely briefed Diana face-to-face because I'd only spoken to her on the phone." Their host, Samantha, withdrew into the kitchen to watch Countdown on a small TV set. Diana, Bashir, and Spencer got down to business. Spencer told her, "I had an NBC notebook. I'm a nerd with notes, and I just took notes throughout because that's what I did. I don't think Bashir looked at me once during the whole time. He was transfixed with Diana, and I just sat there jotting everything down. The 8 pages of notes that Spencer compiled are less like a thriller than a scribbled dream diary pulled out of the naughtiest reverie of a tabloid hack. Escort girls, divorce, scum, Fergie, season love, Queen, lines being tapped, bugs on car. Some targets leap out from Spencer's notes. Jeffson dangerous, money. Jeffson used to do flying lessons in Jersey. Used to go to Jersey for weekends. Hasn't been this year. There was Jersey again, the home of Penfold consultants from the Matt Weissler forgeries. Also, the source of the money in the second set of homemade forgeries, unveiled at Althrup 5 days earlier. Bashir seems set on making Jersey the home of dark, unknowable wickedness. But remarkably, there were tiny glimmers of truth, and for Patrick Jeffson, deeply disturbing ones. He'd studied me. He found out where I spend my holidays, that I was taking flying lessons, that's quite cold-bloodedly, forensically taking my life apart. That it makes me feel angry doesn't begin to describe it. I'm also creeped out by it. Other trusted figures in Diana land were fingered too. The Daily Mail reporter whom Diana liked the most, Richard Kay, was said to be in cahoots with Prince Charles's man. Spencer's notes read, Richard Kay plus Aylard had dinner in Riverside Room of Savoy 3 weeks ago. Kay entirely untrustworthy. Kay said to me he claimed that I had set up 3 shell companies. Now, I don't know much about company law, but the implication is that you're doing something fraudulent, hiding income from the revenue. He claims that I was paid off by an informant at the Chelsea Harbor Club, which was the gym the princess used. He maintained that I was having an affair with one of the princess's friends, a married woman. Again, completely untrue. Someone I barely know. I was quite clear that this was all an attempt to undermine the princess, to appeal to her paranoias, if you like, but also to insert a wedge between those that she was comfortable with, her friends and close circle, and make her think that she couldn't really trust them. So another traitor, and another dig at his dining partner. Spencer's notes continued. Aylard has no conscience, very weak plus cowardly, probably having an affair. According to Richard Kay, this would have resonated with Diana. Richard Aylard was her enemy-in-chief, if you like. He once worked for Diana, in fact, as her equerry. And then he'd gone to work for her husband and had risen to the very top and become the private secretary. She viewed him as someone who was making her life difficult. And the very idea that he would be in collusion with her own senior aide, Patrick Jeffson, would have triggered alarm bells with Diana. Spencer noted down specifics, which Bashir claimed to have, on how Diana was under surveillance. 3 lines at KP, bugged, mail read, D followed twice in a car recently. Kay told me Bashir maintains that her phone lines at Kensington Palace were tapped. Her car phone was tapped, bugs had been placed in her car to track its movements. He maintained that twice, quite specifically in the previous week, she'd been followed, not by paparazzi, but by members of the security services. Then the talk veered on to Diana's in-laws. An astonishing claim about the then 31-year-old Prince Edward, at that time unmarried. Edward has AIDS. Royal Marsden Hospital. Another claim preserved in just 6 words scribbled in Spencer's notebook would have caused Diana to wonder how soon she might be asked to wear the crown. Queen ill, heart, eats for comfort. Wow, this guy, he just had no bounds on what he was planning on saying. This is some crazy stuff. Prince Edward, AIDS, the Queen, a fatty who eats for comfort. Dying, her heart, questionable. At what point was anybody planning on just standing up and casting off the shackles of these very evident lies? Patrick Jeffson had sought to imagine Diana's reaction to the extraordinary barrage of information coming her way. He told me there was an enormous volume of new information that she was having to process. There's a principle exploited by propagandists through history that the bigger the lie you tell, the easier it is to believe. Once you've broken down one wall of skepticism, then the rest tend to go down more easily. If you're clever about it, and I suspect Martin Bashir was, you can't stop believing one without believing the lot. That's true enough. One story which emerged that afternoon does seem to stretch credibility to its limit. As though Prince Edward having AIDS and the Queen dying of a heart attack because she's just constantly eating for comfort weren't large enough lies as it is. But this story said, special present for William 3 weeks ago. Bleeping swatch. Richard Kay said this was possibly the most extraordinary claim of all. Bashir claimed that William had received from his father a watch. In fact, he even named the manufacturer. It was a Swatch, very popular in the mid-1990s. Bashir claimed that it contained a recording device, and he was therefore recording his mother. The very idea of the then 13-year-old Prince William doing any such thing, it's beyond unsettling. That is extraordinary. So now he's implicating Prince William? That watch he wears, the one he wanted? Recording device. Even your own 13-year-old son's after you. I mean, at that point, I'd have flipped the table and told the beast to get out. Just over a quarter of a century later, on Monday, March 1st, 2021, Martin Bashir faced a video camera, his two lawyers beside him, Lord Dyson on the screen in front of him. And so, James Bond watches? A prince with AIDS? By this stage in the inquiry, he had already had to deal with some tough questions. Matt Weissler's forgeries on August 31st? Yes, but they're not as bad as they look. Another set of forgeries on September 14th? Well, that didn't happen. Now Bashir squared up once again. The 8 pages of notes that Spencer had produced? Bashir said, "Well, I do fear that this is a collation of material which probably was written sometime later or even possibly last year." Bashir was adamant. The back and forth between him and Lord Dyson that day soon became testy. Bashir: "Is it possible that I could have said some of these things? There's a second category where I think it's highly unlikely I would have said these things, and there's a third category where I would never have said some of these things." Spencer's notes were shown to him. MI6 taped C in Endgame. Dee told Eilard what she thought of him, plus that she wouldn't divorce. Bashir answered, "That suggests that it's the Princess of Wales who's saying that. That's not me saying it. If I'm sitting in front of the Princess of Wales, am I telling her what she's told Eilard? It doesn't make any sense." Spencer's notes were again shown to Bashir. Difficult relationship with William for Dee. Bashir: "How on earth would I be sitting there at the meeting telling the Princess of Wales about her relationship with her son? It doesn't make any sense." Dyson: "You keep saying it doesn't make any sense. I take it that by that you mean you did not say it." Bashir: "Well, I did not say it. Absolutely." And then there's this reference here. Edward has AIDS? Bashir: "Again, it's being alleged that I'm sitting in my first meeting with the Princess of Wales and her brother, and I'm making an allegation about a serious, chronic, potentially fatal illness that may have afflicted her brother-in-law. If I were to say that, surely one would accept if I was the originator of that idea. It'd be very easy to check the provenance of that claim. Are you saying that you just don't think any of this was said by anybody at this meeting?" "I'm saying, Lord Dyson, that I cannot possibly have said the things that are being attributed to me, because they are utterly outlandish and so easy to check that had I said any of these things, the Princess of Wales could have rung Buckingham Palace and said, 'Has Prince Edward contracted HIV?' What about the bleeping swatch? It was alleged that I had said that Prince William had been given a watch that was somehow a device. Well, if I'm sitting in a meeting making an allegation that the princess's son has a swatch, which is in some way being used for bugging purposes, would it not strike you as perfectly obvious that all she would need to do is go and see her son, ask for the watch, and I would be immediately discredited as an idiot and a fool and somebody not to be trusted?" Dyson responds, "There's no doubt that an awful lot of these things set out here are fantastic. The question is, whose words are they? Spencer says that they came from you, and that he thought you are a fantasist, and that your motivation might have been to frighten Diana. Can you offer any explanation for this? Are you saying this is pure invention on the part of Spencer? Or what are you saying?" Bashir: "I can't speculate on what Earl Spencer's thinking was. What I'm saying to you is, I don't know who said these things, or whether they were said. But I am confident that in the vast majority of cases, I could not possibly have said these things." In the vast majority of cases? What does that mean? Dyson's patience was clearly wearing thin that day. Once again, as with the forgeries, 2 stories were being offered, describing 2 different realities, with no overlap in the middle. But Bashir did seem to offer an intriguing further possibility, that Diana had pitched in with wacky ideas of her own. Bashir: "One thing I think that you need to know, Lord Dyson, and you may already know this, that the Princess of Wales had a number of relationships, and they included clairvoyants, mediums, mystics, various other people who provided her with support, consolation, and so on. What I'm saying to you is that it's perfectly possible that some of the material in here are things that she had garnered and she had said, and as I say to you, there are so many occasions in here where I couldn't possibly know the details. Plausible deniability, that's what he was so good at. So, is that how it was? A free-ranging discussion where some of the weirder stories came from Diana herself? Not according to Spencer. In his testimony to the inquiry, he said, "I'm a note-taker, but I think I particularly took them to make sure I could remind Diana of what had been said, if she progressed things." Dyson: "What was her reaction to all of this?" Spencer: "Well, she didn't say much. I remember Bashir sitting there with an A4-sized notebook, and he sort of went through them, but I don't remember her contributing really." Spencer recalls that as the meeting went on, he grew more and more concerned about whether he had done the right thing, calling Diana at all. "It was a very big deal for me. I had never introduced Diana to a journalist before." He'd spent several hours with Bashir at Althorp, but some of the things he was hearing now simply did not seem to add up. Indeed, the very first note he took down had set off an alarm. 4 months ago, 3 men met him. MI6. Spencer knew that there's a big difference between MI5, the UK-based security service who look after things like counterterrorism or catching spies on British soil, and MI6, by and large foreign-facing, the James Bond characters who lead a much more glamorous life. So MI6 would hardly be the ones tasked with spying on his sister. That would be the other lot, MI5, whom Spencer remembered Bashir had name-checked in their previous discussions at Althorp. And then there was Worf. Scum. Escort girls in Langham Hilton. Inspector Ken Worf was Diana's police bodyguard, said by Bashir to have been up to no good in a 5-star hotel, coincidentally just 100 yards from BBC headquarters in central London. But Spencer had heard Bashir make the same allegations about an entirely different person during their last meeting. He had said exactly the same thing when I spoke to him earlier about a Daily Express reporter. So I thought it was very unlikely. When I say the small details caught him out, that was one. Because I thought it's so unlikely 2 people would be doing the same thing in the same place. The straight fact was that the things he had told me during our meeting at Althorp did not fit with what he was telling Diana now. Spencer, the chap who had been a reporter himself for nearly 10 years, longer than Bashir in fact, had the strong sense that what he was hearing was, crudely put, crap. He had sat back saying little, carefully noting where the briefing led. A number circled round each new claim. Number 32 was a story about Diana's hired security expert. Graham Harding, Fergie's contact, has swept Kensington Palace recently. Couldn't do telephone lines. Didn't do it thoroughly. Spencer wrote 33 and circled it, ready for more. But there was no 33rd story. The meeting wrapped up, Spencer bemused but content that he had marked Bashir's card. Spencer said, "I felt that I was listening to a man who was not telling the truth. He was overexcited, but also shifty. That's why I consigned him to history at the end of the meeting." And Spencer thought Diana had the same queasy feeling. He told me, "Bashir left first, and I said to Diana, I need a word. I said, look, I'm really sorry I've wasted your time because I think the bloke's full of crap, actually." And she didn't for a moment dispute that. She didn't say, "Well, no, I think he has a point." She just said, "Don't worry. It was lovely to see you, and it doesn't matter at all." So I really did think that was the end of it. The problem was Diana had been watching a different movie that afternoon. Or at least the kind where 2 friends, brother and sister even, can leave the cinema and say, "Actor X, wasn't he great?" Great, he was hopeless. But then they both hug and head for the tube. What happened in Knightsbridge that afternoon was much more serious. Bashir was in. Oh, you guys. I can't stand it. I hate that she was tricked like that. We have one more chapter. It's quite short, so let's just go ahead and read it. It's called Team Diana. That afternoon, Princess Diana's world had become a completely different place. Someone who saw her soon after the short journey back from Knightsbridge to Kensington Palace said she was elated, walking on air, because she knew the score. Diana was delighted to know at last for definite that she was indeed surrounded by spies and traitors, that there was a whole tribe of people who wished her harm and had fiendish electronic devices, including a secret watch, in order to do it. Thus far, there had only been questions. "The chap I had a thing for, Barry, murdered? That phone call from James Gilby, a radio Hamel GCHQ. Clicks on the line. Perhaps when I leave, perhaps when I arrive. For years, well-attested horror stories that would keep anyone awake at night had been sprinkled with the cruelest kind of wicked fairy dust. Diana might be wasting her time worrying. They might just be stories. They might not be true. Now she knew that they were true, and she wasn't crazy after all. Diana's sense of relief, of triumph, will have been like the person with a tiny nagging pain who will not shut up, who exhausts the sympathy of every friend and relative, but then finally gets their diagnosis. Yes, and who listened. What's remarkable is that Diana very quickly dealt with the diagnosis, and in pugnacious fashion. She would have the treatment, the surgery, whatever it took, and she'd start right away. From September 19th, when she met Bashir for the first time, to November 5th, when the interview was recorded, when she came out fighting on camera, there were only 47 days. So why did Diana see one movie, her brother Charles quite another? For 2 hours that afternoon, Diana had listened intently as Martin Bashir peered in his A4 notebook, delivering one extraordinary revelation after another. Here was a sober-suited fellow with gold-rimmed glasses, someone who had already shown scary-sounding documents to Charles. Bashir was the BBC, and not merely the gold-standard copper-bottomed 10 o'clock news BBC, the A-team when it came out to digging out state secrets. Panorama. 30 years ago, before internet news, before the collapse of trust which Bashir himself helped bring about, if BBC Panorama said that's how it was, then that was how it was. Diana wasn't a regular viewer, though she knew its reputation. Patrick Jeffson, too. Panorama was the gold standard. Panorama was what you watched. I can remember when I was little, my mother would let me stay up long enough to hear the introductory music because it was so captivating. She knew that it was a favorite of mine. So, from that age, we'd grown up to hold it in the highest regard. Charles Spencer was a fan of Panorama, too. But something about Bashir still didn't gel. Their third meeting had been on September 19th. For maybe 6 hours in total, one experienced journalist had been able to size up the working technique of another. Spencer had quibbles over Bashir's wandering account from one meeting to the next, but deep down he felt that Bashir was simply a chancer. Jonathan Maitland, the colleague who had watched Bashir at work for 6 years, told me, "There are two sorts of people in this world, those who fall for Martin's charm and those who don't. There were plenty who'd be like, 'You're a bit weird and I don't want anything to do with you.' There were others who bought it and were really burned by it." Spencer wanted facts, and from someone he could believe. Bashir told Lord Dyson how Diana liked clairvoyant mediums and mystics. One of the people Diana went to for counsel at exactly this time, who describes herself as an energy healer, was able to witness Bashir's impact at first hand. Simone Simmons, aged 38 when she and Diana met, offers what could be described in a catch-all phrase as New Age therapy. Yes, there were crystals and tarot cards, but the greatest succor she offered the princess seems to have been just a friendly ear. Simmons told me, "I was recommended to Princess Diana for healing at the end of 1993. And over time, we became very close friends, even though we did have massive arguments. Because I was very blunt with her, and she didn't always like the things I said. She has a powerful memory of the exact moment when Martin Bashir arrived on the scene in September 1995. Diana was terribly excited, really. You could see she was floating. I mean, she was on one of those clouds that you just couldn't get her down from. In her small North London flat with scented candles, wind chimes softly nurtling, a sheaf of letters and cards provides evidence of an intimate girly friendship. Diana was an amazing lady. She wasn't worldly wise, but she was highly intelligent. She always said, if you're sitting at a dinner party, you have to pretend that you don't understand what people are talking about, especially if it's important things. And that way people ignore the fact that you're there. And that's the best way to be kept in the loop. On September 19th, 1995, Martin Bashir was the second life-changing character to enter Diana's orbit in the space of just a few days. On September 1st, a Friday, Diana had visited London's Royal Brompton Heart and Lung Hospital, a low-rise, functional-looking building in the heart of Chelsea. But this was a private mission, a 10 a.m. meeting with another of her lesser-than-conventional acquaintances, Irish-born Una Toffolo. This 66-year-old woman, part of Diana's inner circle since 1989, is usually described as a princess's acupuncturist, but her extraordinary life history suggests a deep spiritual role. After 20 years as a nun, including time with Mother Teresa in the slums of Calcutta, Toffolo left to become a nurse, eventually working in Paris where she tended the Duke of Windsor, the former Edward VIII, through his final days. I didn't realize that connection. On this occasion, it was her husband Joseph Toffolo, who was in need of medical care. He'd undergone triple heart bypass surgery, and Diana wanted to wish him well. Simone Simmons recalls, I was actually in hospital having a hysterectomy, and she was going to come and see me, and instead of her coming, I got a room full of flowers, and a phone call from Diana saying, I'm sorry, I can't be with you, but I have to tell you something. I went to see Joseph Toffolo yesterday, and I think I've met my Mr. Wonderful. Toffolo's operation had been conducted by the world-renowned surgeon, Sir Magdi Yaqub. Assisting him in theater was 36-year-old senior registrar Hasnat Khan. Una Toffolo would later say, I hadn't noticed anything about Hasnat Khan except that he was a very kind man with lovely eyes and beautiful hands, and that he was a caring surgeon. But after he had left the room, Diana said to me, Una, isn't he drop-dead gorgeous? And that was how it started. I think he made a huge impact on her. I suppose she fell in love with him at first sight. For Diana, this was the beginning of what had been documented as a breathless romance, an escapade. Part of the thrill, Diana's ability to keep her unlikely new romance a secret from the media. To go to a cinema, like any normal couple, Diana invented disguises and seemed to relish her tradecraft. Simone Simons recalled one remarkable success. She had a long, dark wig, completely different clothes to what she'd normally wear, glasses sometimes, different makeup as well. When I went to the palace, the boys were there, and this woman came downstairs and she said, Her Royal Highness will be seeing you upstairs in her little room. I said, okay, and I walked up the stairs. And the boys were there. They burst out laughing. I said, so what's so funny? And they said, You didn't recognize Mummy. Clap, please. Hasnat Khan was born the eldest son of a wealthy family in Pakistan, drawn to London for his PhD studies under Professor Yaqub. Simmons says that he had a patent lack of interest in celebrity and principles that even 30 years ago seemed somehow antique. Until the divorce was finalized, he wouldn't lay a finger on her. He was a perfect gentleman. She said he was the only man in her life that didn't want anything from her, except for her. You know, when his exhaust broke down, she was concerned they'd be arrested because of the noise that the car was making and wanted to pay for a new exhaust, and he said, I'm a man. I'm working. I earn a decent salary. Please, I'll do it myself. And he wouldn't let her pay a penny. And he's the only man who didn't want anything from her. All he wanted to do was to give her emotionally what she needed. Martin Bashir seems to have been quite clear what he wanted from Diana. He'd already driven to Althorp twice, lying solidly, inventively, for 4 hours to her brother solo, another 2 hours to Charles and Diana as a pair. Charles wasn't sold, but Diana was, right away. Could it be that the coincidence of Bashir's ethnic background was part of the magic? Jonathan Maitland said to me, Timing? The Greeks say, kairos, the influence of events. Martin was pathologically, compellingly charming and ruthless. And he culturally, obviously, had a huge amount in common with the man she was in love with. So I have no doubt he would have been able to capitalize on that. It's highly plausible. Simone Simons is more definite. She says that as Diana's unlikely infatuation developed, Bashir also oftentimes became her secret conduit to the handsome doctor. She told me, for Diana, Martin Bashir was the obvious choice of go-between, because they're from the same place, Pakistan, and for quite a few months, Martin was the go-between. And so that was how the world was for Diana come September 1995. The thrilling intensity of a new relationship, a new kind of relationship with the modest cerebral medic, one that would sustain, it is said, up to the time of her death 2 years later. Plus, the incredible news that every one of her deepest, darkest fears had been entirely validated. Patrick Jeffson witnessed it all firsthand. He said to me, think of the world that she was living in at that time. You don't have to watch The Crown to see that life in the royal family can be a pretty high-drama business. Now, Diana knew that Patrick Jeffson was a spy. Her chauffeur was a spy. Her police bodyguard, too. Her car and her phones were being hacked and tapped. She was Truman Burbank in the movie, where a whole world had been constructed to follow her every move. But now Bashir had explained the premise, and together she and the man from the BBC would exult in spoiling the plot. She and Bashir would be a team. They would fight back. And for the young woman who was at the very top of their hit list, be afraid. So dramatic. I think that's really interesting, but I also think it's really true. That what could have pulled her into believing Bashir all the more was his Pakistani background, and because she was in love with a Pakistani doctor and was really kind of proud of the fact that she was. She talked a few times about her love for Asian men and how she thought they were very attractive. And I think that she liked that she was dating somebody who was different than the other men that she had dated, or what people would have suspected that she would have dated. I think that there is this kind of quality amongst some elite people who, when they step out of the bounds of expectation, it's like a thrill thing. Like, everyone would expect that I would date this white, elite guy with a peerage or something, but here I am over here with a doctor at a modest hospital who's from Pakistan. That's the kind of person I am. I don't have any of these weird boundaries that you people have. And so I think too, I think she sort of patted herself on the back for that, if I can say it. I think for her station in life, people had decided the sort of person and the ethnicity of the man she would date. And when she went different from that, I think she sort of gloried in what might be perceived as rebellion. And then I think to meet this guy from the BBC who was also Pakistani, who was like then became the go-between between her and her Pakistani doctor. I think that would have like thrilled her. I think like feeling the warmth of connection between herself, the guy from the BBC, and her doctor, and both of them were Pakistani, and they were going to help her rebel against this uptight Anglo-Saxon lot that just wanted to put a boot on her neck. Like, I think that would have thrilled her. Because Diana's a really complicated character. I think this book is like highly sympathetic to her, and I think that because of the nature of the book, one that describes her being deceived, she is 100% the victim here. But I think there's a lot of other things in her life where she wasn't necessarily a victim. I think that sometimes she was very difficult and very emotionally unhinged sometimes, and I think that made her difficult to live with. And then I also just think that like a little bit childish in some of the things she would do, like some of the things that would thrill her, like dating somebody who's a different ethnicity. If that like instills thrill in you and you get kind of like excited and you kind of get off on the fact that it's transgressive to the norm, that's not fair to the person you're dating. They're not trying to be transgressive to the norm. They're just living their life, So that's gross and weird and childish. And so sometimes I do think that Diana was childish. And it makes total sense to me that she would have like gloried in this like secret connection, this like cultural connection between Bashir and the man that she loved. I think that's a really interesting point, and I definitely think that would have sort of just added spice to the whole thing. All right, well, thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I will see you guys later. Tomorrow we have a regular chapter of our book, but then also a secondary video as well. So I look forward to that, and I'll see you then. Bye.